Obviously, literacy functions in my life as a Rhet comp teacher. But whenever I think about literacy, I usually think about two events early in my life. One dealing with how my father supported our literacy with putting a lot of books in the house. He would even buy those bound Harvard classics. I think he thought they were a good deal, and they sat on the shelves for years, but they always looked like a thing to aspire to when I was young. And so we also read comic books, and he would take us across the river into St. Louis to go get comic books just like every other weekend, every month. And I remember we would go to this one comic book store every time, and we would have a long drive back home. And I remember wanting just to dig into the pile as soon as I could. And so sometimes we'd even be coming back at night, and I would be lifting up the comic book so that the headlights from the car behind me would be my light reading source. And I would wait for headlights and then turn the page and read as much of the page as I could. And that, I just remember kind of being hungry to read those things, and that memory sticks out. And then I think the other story that sticks out in terms of literacy was also from my childhood and also from my father. He was in the Army Reserves, and so he would have to go onto this Army base a couple of times a month. And when I was, 9 or 10, he would take me with him quite often. And we would go into this big, huge, warehouse, and there would be a bunch of big Army trucks and tanks, and he took me into this small little room where there were a bunch of computers, and I'd never really been on a computer before. And he sat me down, and he turned on the computer, and he said, "I know there are games somewhere on this machine. I don't know where." And he showed me one command, which was directory. This was back in the old DOS days, and so he taught me the directory command. And then he said, "As long as you don't type this other thing, we're fine." And he showed me DEL all files, the asterisk, period asterisk, or whatever it was. And he was like, "As long as you don't type that, we're fine. If you type that, then I'll probably lose my job." And so he told me to just don't do that one thing and we're fine. And he showed me directory. And whenever I typed directory, I saw other things. And I started to piece together that exe was probably an executable file of some kind. It probably meant go, And so I just played around with it, and about 20 minutes later, my dad came back, and I was playing this little, really basic helicopter game where you're flying this little green blob around and just kind of shooting stuff. And he had never, ever found that game before. And so he walked back, and he stared at the screen, he looked at me, he looked back at the screen, and he said, "You little shit." And that's, to this day, that's probably the best compliment I've ever received for some sort of literacy event. And so I still think about that as a great memory of play around. You can't mess anything up. Just don't type this one thing. But generally, don't mess anything up. And that was such a safe way for me to experiment and learn. So I think anytime I think of literacy, I think of those two events.